Hello, this is Mr. Wolf, and we are continuing to read Chains by Laurie Halse. We are on to chapter 12. Friday, June 7th, 1776. By virtue of the authority vested in us by certain resolutions of the Congress of the Colony of New York of the 7th day of June, do therefore summon you to appear before us, to show cause, if you have any, why you should be considered as a friend to the American cause. Summons from the New York Provincial Congress to a suspected Tory. Becky sent me to fetch the Lady Seymour to help Madam get through having her husband arrested like that. The old lady lived 2 blocks north of Trinity Church, the one with spires that scraped the sky. It's one of them old Dutch-style houses. Got a red door and a knocker, looks like a heart, Becky said. Can't miss it. The house was not far from City Hall, along a street where soldiers with heavy axes were chopping down the row of tall poplar trees. Fortifications, a soldier explained to a cardman, to protect against the invasion. Any day now, they say. The red door made the house easy to find. I walked through a beautiful garden around to the back. Neatly trimmed boxwood hedges created a path lined with young betony plants, lavender daylilies, and honeysuckle. Mamma would have admired the roses. My fingers itched to pluck up the scraggly weeds that were crowding them, but I dared not. I knocked at the back. The door was opened by the whitest girl I had ever seen. Her skin was pale as water, except for 2 flame-colored spots on her cheeks. Her eyebrows and eyelashes were near invisible, and her eyes a mix of pewter and blue. She wiped her hands on her apron and said something I didn't understand. "I've come for Lady Seymour," I explained. "Madame Lockton requires her presence." She frowned. "What wilt you?" "What did you say?" I asked. "In Augenblick ausgeblieft," she said before she closed the door in my face. What was an Augenblick? New York was stranger every passing day. I knocked again, but there was no answer. I was about to walk home when I heard Lady Seymour's voice through an open window. A moment later, the door opened, and she stood there in the kitchen. I curtsied proper-like. "Beg your pardon, ma'am, but they've arrested the master. Madam is poorly." She nodded. "They've been hunting loyalists all day. I told Anne it would come to this. Come inside, child. Isabel, is it not?" The kitchen was larger than the Locktons, with a tiled hearth and copper pots hanging on the wall. A smoke-colored cat curled itself around my ankles, its tail in the shape of a question mark. "Please, sit down. You must be hungry." I perched on the edge of the chair. Lady Seymour poured me a mug of fresh milk. My surprise at having a proper lady do so must have shown on my face. "You could do with some building up," she said, as she pushed a plate of molasses cookies to me. "Eat, and tell me everything." She turned to her servant, who stood by the hearth. "Will she ausgeblieft even der Members ausstoffen?" The strange girl bobbed once and left the room, the pale pink ribbons from the back of her cap trailing behind her. "She speaks only Dutch," Lady Seymour explained, "and shows no inclination to learn English, I'm afraid. Now, a bite and the events." I chewed the cookie quickly, took a sip of milk, and recounted near everything, though I neglected to mention my role as the household spy. She listened carefully as I spoke, and asked plenty of questions. "Did Elihu say anything to the men who arrested him? Did he give them any names?" "Not in my hearing, ma'am." She sat back in her chair. "He's in no danger, so long as he stays silent." She broke off a piece of cookie and popped it into her mouth and chewed. "I imagine Anne is in a lather. "Yes, ma'am," I said carefully. She told Becky to pack the trunks for Charleston. Lady Seymour shook her head. I don't blame her, but fleeing would ensure that the rebels would take everything. Yes, ma'am, I mumbled. I took an overly large bite of cookie, certain she would send me back straight away. She tapped her forefinger on the table as she pondered, her rings flashing in the light. Right, she said firmly, having come to a decision. I will write a note for you to take to the lawyer's office before you go home, and another for Anne, telling her that Elihu will be set free soon. The Dutch girl came back to the kitchen and said something I could not make out at all. Lady Seymour rose from her chair and motioned for me to stay seated. Finish those cookies, please, and drink a second glass of milk. You can't run errands for me unless properly nourished. And that is the end of chapter 12. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again soon.